So I just wanted to start by setting this in context of what we're doing. The Learning and Development team are running a number of appreciative inquiry sessions and various other e-learning and other resources. We've run one appreciative inquiry session already in November last year, where we looked at using appreciative inquiry for change, and it seemed to go over very well. So what we decided to do was to do a series of 6 or so altogether, looking at themes that we think are important, but also that we're getting feedback from yourselves as being important. So what came through last time was that coaching and performance was a really key theme, and we thought, well, why not look at appreciative inquiry for enhancing performance, especially obviously as it's performance appraisal time as well, so hopefully it's good timing. So this is what we're doing this time. You will find that after the event, as usual, you will get an evaluation, but maybe even more importantly than usual, please can you complete that and give some ideas of what further themes might be useful to look at, looking at appreciative inquiry, because we're being quite emergent with this and planning them according to the feedback that you give us. In addition to that, I also wanted to mention that you'll notice there's a video camera at the back of the room, and Sarah and I are mic'd up. We're recording this so that people beyond Oxford can have access to these sessions. Something that Learning and Development's trying to do increasingly is make our sessions available for those that can't make it, either because of the snow or usually because they can't geographically get here. Just to reassure you, your conversations won't be recorded. It'll just be Sarah's presentation, this introduction, and some group work. So please don't let that prevent you from contributing fully. And finally, just to mention as well, if you wanted to get some more information or a reminder about this, we've just launched an e-learning module on My Learning. So if you put appreciative in the search box, it'll take you to an interactive module so that you can have a refresher and get some information there. So I'm going to hand over to Sarah just to mention, for those that aren't used to this part of the building, the loos are just across there, tea and coffee and croissants at the back. Please do help yourself throughout the session because there's going to be a lot left over otherwise. And I'll hand you over to Sarah Lewis, who's going to be a facilitator.
Thank you very much. Hi, come on in. Are you coming in? No? Somebody wants you, Claire, I think. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. Part of the feedback from the session last time was that people wanted more time in the discussion space. So today will be some input from the front and then lots of discussion time as well. So that's one of the reasons it's been extended to the 3 hours. We'll probably take breaks sort of as we go. There's tea and coffee, as I understand it, sort of continually at the back there. So as you go into different discussions, if you want to get yourself a drink or something, and as I say, the toilet's just out the back. Now, let me just ask, how many, would you be kind enough to raise your hand if you were here last time? Okay, great. You have just become the most valuable resource in the room, and I'll explain why in a moment. So, so let me explain what we're going to do today. So we're going to start by reconnecting with the last session, and I thought just to sort of wake us all up and to see how much went in last time, we'd have a very short quiz. So I'm going to ask you to get into groups, making sure you have somebody who was here last time in your group. And when we do the quiz, they will also, that will be their chance to explain some of the questions, what's the question about, and some of the answers. And then we'll go through, and of course, I know you're a very competitive organisation, so you know, we may actually add up the points, we'll see. Then we're going to go on and talk about performance at work in general terms. You know, we use the term liberally about improving performance and performance management and high-performing teams and so on, but it might be worth taking a moment just working out what we think we mean when we talk about performance at work. What are we referring to? How do we know it happens? And what factors might contribute to it? And then I want to sort of look at performance from an appreciative inquiry point of view at the 3 levels of organisation, team and individual. So we'll go on to see what AI has to offer in all of those kind of contexts. And then towards the end of the session, where it says activity time, basically there will be a chance for the last 20 minutes or so before we sort of come together and finish for you to decide which of 3 sort of activities we'll have going on you want to be part of, which conversation you want to join. And that will be on an organisational team or individual kind of basis. So whichever interests you most or is most pertinent to your position in the organisation, you can have a bit of extra time on that. So that's broadly what we're planning to do today. Does that sound okay? Right, so let's see what we can remember and convey from last time. So would those people who were here last time be kind enough to stand up? And 3 other people join you, so you're in teams of 4-ish. Yes, this should just about work. If you'd like to arrange yourselves into teams of 4-ish people. Okay. Right, ding ding. Are we ready? Are we ready? What I'm going to do is I'm going to read these out to you one by one. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 questions. Then I'll put the slide up in case you've forgotten what the first one was by then or want to refer to any of them. So I'll read them out one by one, give you a minute or two to make an answer, and I'll put them all up at the end. So the first question, question number 1, worth 1 point, is what is the magic ratio of positivity? I'm looking for the number. What is the magic ratio of positivity? Magic ratio. Positivity. Okay, moving on. Name 3 things. This is question number 2, worth 3 points. Name 3 things strengths are thought to positively affect or be positively correlated with. So 3 things that strengths positively affect or are positively correlated with using your strengths. Okay, 3 things. There was a whole, it was the one with sort of pictures of stars on it, if you remember the slide, with lots of little words on the stars. Okay. Okay, next question. Question 3, worth 5 points, value going up and up. What are the 5 Ds of the appreciative inquiry process? The 5 Ds of the appreciative inquiry model or process. Okay, question 4. Question 4. Question 4 worth 2 points. We looked at some research last time about positivity in conversations, and we measured the magic ratio, but there were 2 other conversational ratios that they looked at. Something to something and something to something, which varied depending on how performing or poor performing the team was. Can you remember what the other 2 ratios in team conversation that are relevant to team performance? So it wasn't just the magic ratio. There were 2 other items that they measured that were relevant to team performance. Conversational ratios. That's the hardest one. That's 2 points. Okay, last question. Question 5. Name 3 effects on people of positive emotional states or feeling good. What does feeling good do for us? 3 things it's correlated with again. I'll just put these up so you can see them. Are we good? Good to go? Very hard. I'm so sorry. I wanted to get it all back into the room because we were sort of calling on this information again today and building on it. So there's a maximum of 14 points by my addition. You're on your honour, you can self-score, we'll let you self-score, so you're on your honour to self-score. So, in terms of the first question, who can tell me anything about what that question means, the magic ratio of positivity? Anything we can remember about what that was about? Yes?
It was to do with the fact that you have to have a healthy ratio in that it's got to be more positive than negative, but not too positive.
Yes? Did you come up with a number at all?
12 is in my head, and I can't remember why.
12 to 1 is kind of the maximum ratio. This is a positive to negative comments.
With kind of 7 out of 10 as a ratio. I can't remember what the scale was, but I thought it was something like 7 out of 10. 7 to 10, would that be 3 to 1? 3 to 1. 3 to 1, right, you can get points for these, okay? If you got 3 to 1, which was the research actual finding, you can have that. If you got anything between 3 to 1 and 12 to 1, you can have a half point. How's that? Okay? What? Positive comments to negative comments.
So the 3 is the positive.
The 3 is the positive. So this is research on high-performing teams, measuring the quality of their conversation. One of the things that emerged was the teams that had a greater than 3 to 1 ratio of positive to negative comments, and therefore positive negative emotional states in their meetings, performed better. And the way the research was done allowed them to say this was causal, not just correlational, because it was over a time period, so they could measure the two things together. So it's a very important discovery, I think, about the fact that, you know, how teams talk together affects how they perform. And as we said last time, there's lots and lots of research building up to suggest that it is happiness causes success, to put it in sort of simple, memorable terms, as much as success causes happiness. So yes, we know that, you know, succeeding often makes us feel good, but feeling good helps us to succeed is kind of something that's becoming more apparent. Okay, so that's question 1, maximum of 1 point. Right, question 2. Anything about strengths? What could we remember about strengths? Anyone to start us off with something? What are they?
Optimal performance.
Yes, it's kind of, yeah, it's the potential for optimal performance. That's definitely one of the ones that it's related to. Fantastic.
What you're naturally good at?
What you're naturally good at, absolutely. That's your strength. That somehow it's an inherent, it's easily expressed, it's something you may do it well or less well, depending on how skilled you are, but the doing of it is kind of effortless. Yeah, comes very easily. Okay, anything, right, what do we get down about what strengths are related to?
Self-esteem.
Self-esteem, yeah. If we feel more confident when we're able to work with our strengths, you can have self-esteem, definitely. So we've got here well-being, engagement.
Motivation.
Motivation, absolutely. I think that should be on here somewhere, and if it's not, it should be. Motivation, yeah, yeah. We find it very motivating. There's a very virtuous circle of using our strengths and feeling engaged in what we're doing. And
we put in pride, which I think is another way of saying mix of kind of well-being, morale.
Yeah, pride. You may have pride. I'm sure we talked about pride last time in the connection of this sort of thing. Okay, any other offers? Anything else that's not on there that you want to make a bid for as being related to strengths? No? Okay, so for those of you who weren't here, again, the research is just building up that the more we work with our natural talents and develop them, the better, you know, this virtuous circle of being more confident, finding it easier to learn to use that strength better, performing at our best, that, you know, the evidence is kind of growing that working with our strengths rather than putting the same amount of energy into our weaknesses. Which doesn't mean to say weaknesses aren't important, because we need to make sure they don't derail us or our team, but we should put more energy into finding out what our strengths are and how to work with them. So it's very relevant to performance. Good, okay. What was the next one? Oh yes, the 5 Ds of the appreciative inquiry process. How did we do with this? Any D at all? Discovery, very good. Anything else? Design, yes? Desire, not officially. Dream, yeah. Dialogue tends to come under design, dialogue to design. It's not a separate heading per se, I'm afraid. No, nice goes in there. It was define and destiny. Okay, so this is your basic appreciative inquiry kind of model. First of all, we have to define the topic. What is the affirmative thing that we're inquiring into? So we were looking at, for instance, high performance rather than when people don't meet performance targets. So our inquiry would be, okay, what helps people to perform? Discovering the best of what is, somebody said, the discovery interviews. So, you know, what's already working here in this area? When are people able to perform at their best, for instance? How could it be if we were able to provide those conditions more, so that more people were performing at their best more of the time? What would that mean for the organisation? What kind of future might we have? Therefore, what do we need to be doing differently now to make sure we have a chance of moving towards those futures? So it's kind of, you know, thinking, having built an attractive picture on the future based on the best of the present, we then come back and kind of say, okay, so what do we need to be doing now to make that the most likely future? And then this is the kind of what happens after the conversation or the event or whatever, which can be a mixture of planned change. Clearly, you know, having had this conversation, we realise we need to rethink our appraisal scheme, for example. But it can also be very emergent, as in people go away with a shifted understanding of what's possible in their organisation and what they're aiming for, and therefore they start to behave a little bit differently, which adds up to something. So that was a maximum of 5 points. Now, could anybody remember the other two conversational things that were measured in the Lasada and HEPI research? Yes?
So the one-to-one ratio.
Yes.
Where basically there's no, not enough being positive and negative, just going on and nothing's being said.
Mm-hmm.
Basically.
Can you remember the other two things that were measured as well as the positive to negative? That's what I was after. Not you, okay. But you're right, the ratios were lower. Okay.
Something about questions and statements.
Yes, very good, very good. Inquiry and advocacy. Yeah, you definitely get a mark for that. Questions and statements is fine. Technically it's called inquiry and advocacy. And the other one was about systems. Sort of about systems? No? It was whether the focus of the group was just about themselves, whether it was just the team, all about sort of their internal dynamics, or whether they were able to bring the wider system into their conversation. So it was known as self or other. What's the ratio of self-comments to other comments? So the more they were able to bring in, what will the impact of this be on our customer? We'll need to get that past the board. We must make sure so-and-so's on board with this. The more they're able to think system-wide, again, the more successful as an organisation they were. So as a group, as a team. So these were the three key things, were the positive to negative ratio, comment ratio, the inquiry to advocacy, or questions to statements, it's a very nice way of putting it actually, ratio, and then the sort of self-obsessed and other-oriented elements of the conversation. And out of that, they discovered that the positive to negative ratio measure was a very good proxy for the others. So in other words, if that was moving in the right direction, the others probably would as well. So that's why we kind of focus on this positive to negative ratio. Right, the effects of people on people of feeling good. We spent some time talking about positivity, as you can tell, last time. Can we remember anything about what's good about having positive affect and various chemicals in our brains? It's the beginning, you know, some of the neuropsychology that's around. Anyone remember?
Increased motivation.
Motivation, yeah, definitely, yeah, more sort of energy and interest.
Enhancing performance, success.
Yeah. Can you remember what it was that made that possible? That's some of the intervening factors between, because you're right, people tend to work better when they're feeling good.
Increased
Confidence, energy. Okay, let's have a look, see if you think that what you've got is near enough. Oops. Those were that was the, here we are. So it's about things like creativity, I don't know if that was part of your performance thing. Sociability, very important, much more interested in the outside world, engaging with others. Interest in novelty. Then there's this sort of ability to think more flexibly and deal better with complexity, which I think are both very important in change. Motivation, someone said motivation, didn't they? Motivation and tenacity. General cognitive performance, good interpersonal relationships. So there's a bit of overlap there. But it's basically about the fact that our brains fire quicker, we remember things better, we can retrieve more, we can be more flexible in our thinking, we can somehow, we're not so rigid, we don't need things to be sort of categorized and sorted in quite the same. We can deal with ambiguity and what's the opposite of transparency? When things are a bit opaque, you know, we can sort of cope better if we're feeling good than when we're feeling in a poor emotional state. Okay, so that was a whistle-stop tour through some of what we covered last time. I realise I've put some people in an unenviable position of being the experts in the group, but we'll do our best. So add up your points. We'll just sort of see, out of interest. Remember what your team name is. Which any team get above 3 points? Hands up if you've got above 3 points. Very good. Okay. Above 5 points. Okay. Above 7 points. Okay. Above 10 points. Hey, I think we have a winner. Very well done. And how many points did your team get out of interest?
Well, we think we got 12.
12. No, that's a fair margin on 10. Okay, you can dispute that with... Oh, there were 2 of you. That really does help, doesn't it? So there's something in there about the increased capacity when we have 2 people who both have some knowledge working together rather than one poor person trying to do it on their own. Anyway, good. So the reason we've done that, of course, is because strength and positivity are both relevant to performance. So I just wanted to recap some of the basics for those who weren't able to be here last time. And then we're going to move on to thinking about performance at work. So let me just catch up with myself. What I thought we might do for this is, oh, what was your team name, by the way? I never got to ask. Didn't get one, okay. Would you like to continue to work with the people you're with? Because mostly you've just been sort of trying to answer questions. Or would you like to rearrange at this point? There'll be other opportunities. Stay where you are, yes, because you've only really been doing factual sort of knowledge stuff, haven't you? Okay. So stay with your, ignore the first instruction, but what I'd like us to do is to have a conversation about what do we mean by performance at work? What do we think we're talking about? So when we talk about performance at work, what do we mean? To what are we referring? And how do we know a high performer at work? What is it about someone that makes everybody say, you know, they are one of the stars, they're really good at what they do, they're a really good member of the organisation or whatever? Okay, so just on your tables, about 15 minutes probably for the conversation, hopefully. So enjoy it and say hello to your friends again if you need to. And try not to just rejig the quiz. Okay, if we can come back together now. Thank you. Sorry. I'd love to see people really engaged in their conversations. You'll have plenty of time to have to build on this. So let's start this end of the room. A couple of things that came up for you about what performance is or how you know it when you see it from your conversations. Outcomes. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. People achieving their goals and targets and being successful. Absolutely.
You were saying it's not just about what you do, but how you do it. So
absolutely. Yes. So some of the more sort of discretionary things, or the tone as well as the final result. This is really key, this one. I work quite a lot with the organisations where the senior team are puzzled because one of their managers somewhere gets good results, and yet they keep getting feedback that he's a really difficult manager to work for, and they can't square the two up. And that is exactly that sort of thing. It's how you know, not only what you achieve, but how you achieve those results. And very often, what's going on below that person in the organisation is not great news, but the results are still coming out. It's just about how they're being driven. Okay, what about here? What came up here around performance? Something to add to that, or?
You was talking about good communication. You're doing an amazing job, but you don't actually know about it.
Yes. Yeah, it's interesting. That works on two levels, doesn't it? One is we need to be connected to the rest of the organisation so they can benefit from what we do. But there is also this thing about, especially if you're going to get into kind of performance appraisal and management and promotion in organisations, a little bit of managing your own PR. Where does that come in? And how do good performers, they do it well, it has integrity, they're not trying to claim things that aren't theirs, but somehow they've got enough of a presence that people know what's going on. Okay, thank you very much. Something else to add from this end of the room?
We were talking about, we first of all wondered whether it was performance or high performance, because performance could be anything. And then we were talking about, obviously you've got your achieving objectives and doing a job description, but then also adding value into the system, whether that be the team or as an individual.
Absolutely, yes. I think that's very important, that kind of citizen behaviour, discretionary effort, thinking beyond the obvious to make the connections, or taking your expertise into other arenas and being generous with it, that sort of thing. Absolutely. Helping others perform well, in fact. Yeah. For yourself, something you'd like to add? Sorry, you got the last call.
We were talking about how it's really role specific, because it's very difficult to compare like for like in terms of who is a high performer in very different types of jobs in the organisation. Like the other table over there was saying, it's about actually not just getting on and doing your own job, but giving something back, able to lead and inspire others.
Yes.
And to bring them along with you.
I think the point you've made there about it's sort of role specific is really important, actually, and I would go beyond just role specific and say it's often context specific. And again, I'm sure you've met this in your work. There's people who have been incredibly successful and recognised as a really good performer, particularly in leadership, and then somehow they get put in a situation where it all goes pear-shaped. They do exactly what they've done before as a leader, and yet they don't get the results. And technically, they've suddenly failed after a 20-year career of succeeding. And you meet them 5 years later, still trying to make sense of what happened, and does that mean they are good or they aren't good, or, you know, and usually it's that actually the context was very different, and their fantastic set of leadership skills and their strengths and their experience and their knowledge just didn't help them, and their strategies didn't help them in this particular context, and people didn't, no one around them was able to help them realise that it was the situation, not them. It was the combination, as it were, that was producing this lack of ability to have effect. So that kind of performance is context specific. So there are some general things, you know, the sort of attitude and the way people behave themselves and those kind of discretionary effort and so on. But there's also something about the right person in the right place to be able to have an impact and make a difference. And again, sometimes when we think of organisations in a very kind of bureaucratic way, we don't always appreciate the nuance of context in which people are, you know, that match between the individual and the particular context to make sure we get the best performance. So there is that thing about, you know, getting the right person in the right place so they can perform. So these are no particular, these are just a few sort of ideas, I think, you know, which is exactly what you came up with, really. Clearly, achieving whatever the outcome of your job is would be seen as a sign of success. This discretionary effort, going above and beyond, is very much part of performance. And I used to work as an investors in people advisor, and I did a lot of work with schools as it happened. And you could the difference between the schools where the teachers, whatever they were doing, they were escorting the visitor, i.e. me, down the corridor, senior sort of teacher. But if litter was dropped or a tie was askew or, you know, a blazer wasn't being worn correctly, they would stop and address it. Just kind of, you know, even though they're not on playground duty, as it were, you didn't let these things go. If you saw something that needed attending to, you just attended to it. That's the kind of sort of looking for out of the good of the organisation, citizenship sort of behaviour, as opposed to the schools where it was, right, head down, we're going to sort of get through these kids to this office, and they're nothing to do with me because, you know, Joan's on playground duty, it's her problem, kind of thing. You know, that's the difference. And it showed everywhere. So discretionary effort, citizen behaviour, exceeding standards appropriately, and then, as people said, increasing value, learning and development for themselves and for others in the organisation. These are some of the sorts of things that we're talking about when we talk about performance at work. And then as to what affects performance, again, there are many things that affect performance, and this is just a sort of sample of some of the ones that are known about and I suppose seem obvious, but we sometimes forget. Clarity of expectations and understanding what success looks like. It sounds so obvious, and yet people often muddle through their work, not really knowing what success looks like. Finding out when they've missed it, because they get the feedback that was, you know, something went wrong there, that wasn't up to standard, that was a mistake, or that, you know, was a failure or an error, but not always having that clear vision of, well, what does it mean to do my job really well? I used to work as a social worker, and I never really knew what the answer to that question was. The tools to do the job, again, basic, but sometimes it's really hard. My partner, and you'll see that again, this everywhere. My partner worked as they call a code checker at Sainsbury's, which means you have to have the machine. And so you had to get in 15 minutes early to lay your hands on one of these machines, and the latecomers couldn't get the machine. It seems crazy, doesn't it? You know, how can they do their job without the tools? But again, that happens everywhere. How do I get pens out of the stationery cupboard that's guarded by the stationery officer? You know, that was at a university I worked at. Okay, intrinsic motivation and satisfaction in the work. This is where we're kind of getting into that. You know, does it play to our strengths? Does it interest us? Is it meaningful? That really helps with performance. That we actually, you know, if it's intrinsically satisfying, if we get a buzz out of doing it, that really helps with the motivation. Clearly, there's less reliance on external motivation. The whole thing of goals, context and contingencies, I won't go into detail today, but it's about how rewarding is the environment to me. Can I get rewards, whether it's knowing a job's been done well, my own satisfaction, whether it's recognition by the environment around me. It's this sort of relationship between goals and rewards. You know, people pursue goals if they feel they're going to be rewarding to them. So am I operating in a goal-rich, reward-rich environment? Because that kind of motivates me to keep going. Another little, you know, I feel good. Another little mental tick or star or whatever it does it for you, you know, when that's been done. So there's something about the whole context, as we were saying earlier. And clearly, of course, feedback is important, and that's kind of where we're sort of moving on to a bit now. Both sorts of feedback are important, positive feedback and corrective feedback, for want of a better term. I think, yes, corrective feedback. Where we sometimes get in a muddle is we don't know which to use for which. And this is becoming clearer with some of the research. Positive feedback, you know, doing well, on the right track, that's looking good, is what you want for anything that's kind of expansive, where you want people to be innovative or creative or build or construct or engage with others, kind of where they're having to, where the path is not clear, where you're finding your way a little bit, where there's a number of possible kind of answers, but you need people to have a go, to engage, to give out something, to take a little risk that, you know, it might not be the right first step at this point, but at least we're doing something. You want the positive appreciation, the positive reward, because you're appreciating effort, you're shaping behaviour. In terms of in the sort of behavioural tradition, you're working to shape the behaviour towards what you want. So it's that classic thing of, if you want people to comment in your meetings, you have to start by appreciating anything anybody says, not critically evaluating it, because that will just shut it down. So to begin with, anybody's idea is a great idea, and we'll find some way of saying something appreciative about it and connecting to it and so on. And as people become bolder and bolder about speaking up in your meeting, then you can start to select about the comments that have the most value and to build on them. But to begin with, you've got to get people talking. That's the first behaviour. So that's, you know, lots of positive reinforcement just to get the behaviour to happen. Corrective feedback is much more effective on performance and motivation, where people need to know where the boundaries are. You know, when it's the sort of detail stuff, and you need to know that, you know, this balance sheet, your mistake is here. This is where you've somehow transposed some figures or something. Then people find that useful and helpful and motivating, because it's about sort of detail, constrained, correct ways of doing things. I need to know what they are. So sort of health and safety type stuff. You know, people need clear signals and appreciate, assuming other things are in place, like generally they want to do a good job. You know, that is useful feedback. But we need to sort of recognise the difference between the two. And I would say most of us are, for all sorts of reasons to do with schooling and education and so on, much better at critical evaluation and corrective feedback than we are necessarily at you know, positive appreciation and positive feedback. And so that's what we're going to concentrate a little bit more on today. There is obviously a whole thing about how you do corrective feedback, which I know you're going to be addressed in other sessions that are being set up for people. So, performance at work, affected by a number of things, means a number of different things. What I want to move on to is think about, what does that look like at an organisational level? If we think about a high... Yes?
Sorry,
yeah.
Is that the list? The whole
That's,
list?
well, that's a list. It's not the whole list. Is there something else you were thinking of?
Very sort of jumping out at me that
Yeah.
isn't there,
Yeah.
which is reward.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And this is what I'm saying about goals and contingencies and rewards. So the rewards in the environment, whether it's... you know, sometimes in some environments it's monetary. So sales targets and bonuses, very clear, and that we know that works in that environment. But in lots of other environments, it's much more about appreciation, recognition, finding an audience.
Even in the sales environment.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, we all like to be recognised, and they do have their salesperson of the month and all that sort of thing, don't they? Which is part of that kind of recognition thing. Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of in amongst the goals. But you're quite right to put it out as a separate thing. Okay. Anything else before we move on? So what I wanted to move on to was Kim Cameron is a researcher in America who's been very interested in the best organisations. And by the best, he means organisations that are successful in terms of, you know, their commercial viability, and also thought of as great places to work. So he was kind of interested in, you know, what's distinctive about these organisations, and he calls them flourishing organisations because they sort of flourish, and the people in them are flourishing as well. And he identified 3 particular things that these organisations have in common and tend to do more than others. They have an active interest in positive deviation, learning from the best that's happening in the organisation. So like everybody else, they will have an interest in negative deviation, i.e. when things aren't up to standard, aren't up to scratch. We call that the deficit gap, so kind of bringing things up to standard. But they have a greater than usual awareness of, interest in where people are managing to exceed the standards. They're interested in finding out what makes the difference between okay and excellent, and helping people move in that direction, sometimes referred to as building the abundance bridge. So we've got the deficit gap this side where we need to bring things up to the standard. Then we've got this abundance bridge where we're providing, you know, more value and higher performance. And so they're kind of interested in noticing that. And you would think it would be obvious in a way, wouldn't it? That if some department with similar sort of resources seems to be doing so much better than another department with the same sort of resources, wouldn't we be interested in what's going on over there? But in many organisations, no, we're not. There's just something odd happens over there. You know, there's no learning for us. It's to do with that unique person, or they just got lucky, or whatever it is. So, but these organisations are much more interested in that. They also have a positive affirmative bias, i.e. they are looking for things to affirm, good things that people are doing, good things about the organisation that they can offer that affirmation for. So that kind of recognition, that appreciation, that knowing who people are and what they're good at and affirming that for them. Again, more than is normal in organisations, you might say. And the positive behaviour, he calls it virtuous practices, I've changed the wording slightly, is about, as we were saying earlier, about how people actually go about doing what they do, how they treat each other. And one of the things he found in some of these higher performing organisations is that there is a culture of what he calls virtuous behaviour, which is things exercising virtues like forgiveness and humility and patience, helpfulness, you know, all these things that we're all kind of brought up to, or most of us are brought up to believe a good way to be, help others. But if you get a culture of that going, you get a virtuous circle going, because when we see other people behave very well, it can have a very inspiring effect on us about how we want to behave as well. So they get these virtuous circles of virtuous behaviour going. And for those of you who are interested, he's written a very nice book, this little book, Positive Leadership. It's about £7 or £8, I think, where he kind of pulls that together. Pulls these things together with some sort of practical questionnaires and so on, which of course are all copyrighted, so that's why they're not here. But I would highly recommend it if you're in a leadership position and be interested in thinking, well, how do I translate this to, you know, my team or my department? But in the meantime, I thought we'd have a little think about OUP as a flourishing organisation, see how we're doing. So I'd like to invite you to get into slightly smaller groups, so you've got a more intense discussion, as it were, of about 4 people. Make some new friends, chance to mix and match. So let's get on our feet, find 3 new people to work with, set yourselves down, and I'll tell you what you're going to do, and you can get yourselves a drink and everything in a minute as well. Very good, well done. Okay, I'm going to bring you around these, which have got the cards in that the exercise refers to. So I'll put them on the table. If you want to take 5 minutes to just get yourselves a cup of coffee or have a break, you know, convenience break, yep, fine. And now's the time to do it, and then you'll have the discussion. Hopefully we'll have about 20 minutes altogether for this. So these are the cards coming around. That is the exercise. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. One of the options towards the end of the morning will be to kind of continue and build on this particular conversation if it caught your attention. But just for the moment, we need to start, move on to thinking about teams in a moment. But just before we do, anything anybody wants to share from their conversation that seemed interesting, or an insight, or other people might be interested, or...
We discussed positive deviance, and I think an interesting point that we were talking about was cultural shift. So there's often that negative attitude to positive reinforcement or positive recognition, oh, how embarrassing, or how awkward. And so that's a cultural change, and working across different cultures. So for example, just seeing, talking about America and the American office and their Mojo Awards, and how that isn't deemed as something that's awkward and embarrassing and uncomfortable, whereas our recognition awards here in the coffee morning is a little bit more. It's just a cultural shift to that. So it was in response to what do you need in place to be able to learn from exceptional performance and outcome. It needs to be culturally acceptable to say we did this really well, or this was a success, or we're really proud of this. And there's an awkwardness about that sometimes.
Yep, absolutely. Fantastic observation. It's the context helps determine kind of how things are received and so on. We will talk a little bit about the kind of giving of feedback and some of the processes that help with that, because it is something about it's the bigger picture, you know, what does it mean to be appreciated, but it's also how do we do it? How does the manager feel? How confident does the person giving the positive feedback feel about their mandate to do that and the effect of it? And it's different for different people, but part of the whole thing is, you know, there's a real business case for it, quite apart from anything else kind of thing. You know, it's going to help us as an organisation if we can get better at doing this. Will be persuasive for some people, for other people it's, you know, different sort of way in. But absolutely right, that sort of a culture thing, and these are the things that build the positive culture, and we can see why they're not necessarily prevalent in all organisations all the time. And there is something about sometimes the hiding your light under a bushel, not blowing your own trumpet kind of thing that can interfere with this in Britain particularly, I think. Okay, anything else that came up in people's conversations they wanted to share?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I think there's a big issue. I think it relates to what you just said, in that sometimes good performance is expected, and so therefore, how do you recognise exceptional performance? Because everyone is expected in a way to be exceptional. It's a tricky thing, and I think maybe and different managers in different teams have slightly different expectations possibly, so there perhaps needs to be more sharing across teams. Well, you know, this is not just normal, this is exceptional, or that sort of thing. Some way of sharing and measuring good performance is really not clear at all.
No, and you're talking about sometimes you're comparing apples with oranges. So yes, there may be something, if you want to have a kind of organisational wide recognition process, then there obviously needs to be some sort of criteria that can be universally applied. However, warning, not everybody finds public recognition rewarding. We really need to know our people. What are they going to find reinforcing? What are they going to find rewarding? For some of us, that's a fantastic paper, please come and present it to the board yourself, would be, well, hey, I'm being recognised. For other people, it would be, I am never going to write anything exceptional again, if this is what happens. So we have to be very careful about, you know, the rewards for the people. Okay, it's a good thing to sort of, you know, it's subtler than perhaps just that we sometimes think. Are we okay to move on to thinking about teams, team performance? Oh, just one more thing before we do, just to kind of relate this to appreciative inquiry, of course. You know, if you wanted to think about, well, for example, some of the points that have been raised, when do people find it possible to give and receive positive feedback and endorsement and affirmation? You could do an appreciative inquiry into that. Because sometimes it happens here somewhere. People say nice things to each other and it's accepted as, yeah, you're right, we did a really good job there, or thank you, I was quite proud of that myself. You know, those conversations do happen somewhere in the organisation, I would wager. So you could do an appreciative inquiry into when are we able to give good feedback and take good feedback. You know, so this is how you can bring appreciative inquiry in. It's a sort of, you know, that we said at the beginning, finding your positive topic that you want to inquire into. That might be one, given some of the things you've raised. Let's just find out when we do, you know, when we're at our best doing this, and we can grow that. And sort of what I want to do now is to give you a chance to have a little bit of a discovery, appreciative interview around team performance. So I'm going to ask you to get into pairs for this one, so you can just have a bit more in-depth conversation. So please find someone you would like to work with. I don't mind if it's someone you know very well or someone you've never met before, but just get into pairs so that we can, you know, the choice is yours, depending on the kind of person you are. Get into pairs so that I can tell you what to do for as we move on to thinking about team performance. Okay, everyone. I think we've all managed to find pairs and 1-3. Thank you for sorting yourselves out. So what we're going to do is give you the chance to have a discovery interview about team level performance. So this is one removed from when you yourself were an excellent performer, more about when you've been part of a team that you would say there was some really good performance at a team level. Now obviously if that example that you choose is from working here, that would be really useful because there'd be lots of context relevant information. If you have to go further afield to find a team that you think was a really high performing team that you were part of, then that's fine as well. And if it's something to do outside of work, other activities that you have where team stuff goes on, that's fine as well. We just want you to, in your pairs, share a story of when you were part of a high-performing team. And just say something about what that was about, how it felt, how you contributed, what that team achieved. If you can pick a particular kind of peak moment when it was kind of, and this was when I knew we really were working well together and really achieving something, was when this happened or that happened, or how we coped with this particular situation or that particular situation. That would be great. The more kind of you can get into a tangible episode of the performance, the better. But you might need to ease yourself in with just sort of remembering the team and what it was about. Your colleague's task is really just to encourage you to tell the story. We're not going to do any analysis in the first stage. We just want you to relive that experience, remember it, bring it back to mind in a kind of a lived sort of way. And when you've both shared your stories, so you've had the chance to exchange the highlight moments, then I would ask you to go back and just do a little bit of analysis, thinking about those two stories. What were some of the things that made that high performance possible? But first of all, just enjoy telling the story and reliving it and inquiring into it and being curious, and save the why for afterwards, second round, after you've both shared a story. Is that clear? So again, sort of 10, 15 minutes sharing stories, 5 minutes answering the second part, just to consider what some of the things that might have made those performances possible. Good, enjoy. And do say hello to your friend first. Excellent. Okay. I'm sorry if you were still in the midst of all of that. But we need to manage our time. Always compromise. So again, any insights or observations that anyone would like to share from their sort of thinking about some of the factors that contributed to some of their peak moments of team performance?
Yeah, I think something that came up in both of our stories was the strength of the relationships of the people within the team when there was this high performance issue. So the high performing.
Yes. And do you know what helped with that strength of relationship? Did you get that far, or?
I think it was this sort of unity in the bond, this sort of single cause, if you like.
Yes. That came up for other people as well, didn't it? That kind of shared objective. And usually along with that goes an interdependency. In other words, no one can achieve that objective on their own. So we are actually all dependent on each other. Yeah. So that really helps. And you do see teams where that is not the case. People are trying to weld a team out of people who are effectively individual workers who have no need to depend on each other. So, so that definitely helps. Shared goal, and we need to rely on each other to do it. Okay, brilliant.
And having a good understanding of everybody's individual responsibility.
Yes. So we're sort of well coordinated and yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Supportive attitude in the team, in the sense that people are flexible in what they're willing to do and adapt to each other and support each other when they need to.
Yes, this. Yes, so that achieving the objective is the most important thing, and actually who does what at a particular moment is secondary to getting the job done.
And a long-term relationship, that there's a vested interest in having that long-term relationship with each other.
Say more?
In the sense that there is a perception, a self-perception of a team, the team sees itself as a team and is interested not just in achieving common goals along the way, but also this long-term relationship.
I think yes, and part of that for me is a very powerful team. Even when I'm off doing my own thing, the team is sort of with me. I think it's partly what you're saying. I'm always thinking about, for the good of the team, how are the other members, how is it going to impact on what we're trying to do?
And it's
so it's a sort of
yeah.
Yes. So this is what's interesting in organisations where I have lots of projects. How does that tie up if it's we're only in a team for a short time, then we're going to be reconfigured. It's one of those challenges also when there's lots of casual workers around. How do you keep recreating some sort of teamness when people are moving? But ideally it's that long-term relationship, and I'm interested in beyond the transactional, what we're getting done, into a much more transformational space. Thank you. Someone over here wanted to add something.
I was just saying how motivating meeting and exceeding your expectations. So if something seems impossible and then your team achieves it, it gives it that forward momentum going into the next challenge.
That's really, really useful, isn't it? That idea of sort of successes along the way and kind of recognising them and celebrating them, and it goes back to that kind of, we can give ourselves a pat on the back at this stage and go forward, sort of renewed sense of confidence and efficacy. Absolutely, yeah.
I think leadership, when we were talking, I think that was something that was coming. So leadership that actually sets a good example, that's very empowering and enabling people, but also that does quietly set an example.
Yes, yes. Leaders. That last one about modelling what you want in your team, as it were, is really key. And one thing the performance kind of research tells us over and over again is that people work or not for their manager. You know, yes, they're part of an organisation, they might have some allegiance to the organisation and so on, but one of the most powerful effects in their environment is their relationship with their manager or their leader, and how that's working, and you know, whether they want to work for them or not. Do I want to do well? Do I want to succeed? Do I want this to help this person? You know, be part of this person's team. Or, as I went into one organisation where they're having a little bit of trouble, and the operations director said to me, when I walk into the restroom, all the men walk out. I thought, right, okay, bit of a way to go here then. So, yeah, and he was just a very critical, kind of didn't really think about the relationship side, just told people when they were doing things wrong. And he became what we call dishing out punishment. This is a technical term now, punishment in terms of operant behavioural conditioning terms. He then became a punisher. So there was an aversion to him as well as to what he was doing. And then we had to obviously pull it back from that, which we did. It was fine. Anything else? Yep.
Sorry, we were talking about when both of us had experience of being in a really high-performing team, and actually what makes that up is where you recognise in the people that you're working with the things that are important to you. So you share the same, you've all got experience of a particular subject area, or you're all prepared to do the extra bit. There's nobody you're all similar type people. And I think when you put together, then it works really well, rather than all being very different.
So there is something about the complementarity and the diversity and how we work with that. And I think part of what you're saying there is when there's enough shared important stuff, whether it's the values or the knowledge base, I would hope on top of that there's room for diverse kind of ways of being, but there has to be something that's core and common. Is that a fair addition?
Yeah, I suppose sort of mutual respect for
yes.
what you hold important.
That's really important, isn't it? The valuing what other people bring. How, you know, there may be different for you, they may have a different skill set, but being able to see how they add value to the team. And that's easier said than done, quite often. You know, because people are very different, they come at things different ways, they have a different makeup, different strengths. We'll come on to this a bit more in a minute. If they do it very differently to how you would do it, it can be quite challenging until we sort of get into this more appreciative space. I think the lady, you want to say?
Kind of along similar lines is having the right combination of people in the team. So if you have a whole team of creatives,
yeah.
you don't get a lot done because yes. So it's kind of having the right skills.
So there is, exactly, I mean that complements what was being said before very well actually, because you need both, don't you? Sufficient sort of commonality and mutual respect and enough diversity that you've got different things done. And I'm sure you're familiar with the beginnings of the whole Belbin research when he put teams of stars together and discovered they didn't do as well as much more mixed teams, because you do need that sort of diversity of skills and approaches and so on. Okay, what we've been using here is what they call episodic memory. In other words, you know, you've actually tried to remember a specific episode, which is a very important part of the appreciative inquiry, discovery, interview process. It's accessing this episodic memory. And the general idea is that as you remember how things can be and you kind of contemplate how things are at the moment, there might be a sort of sense of a move or a motivation to bring some of that knowledge and resource from your own past and sort of apply it to some of what's going on in the present. Whereas when we work with semantic memory, if I just asked you, list all the things that need to go into making a good team, I'm sure you could have done it, but it would have been sort of out there knowledge rather than in here knowingness. Does that make sense? So that's sort of one of the key things of a appreciative inquiry. I'm just going to really just say exactly what you said in a more semantic way, because there's a couple of things I want to pick up. So all of these things you've got, the whole sort of, when I first started being a manager years and years ago, I somehow got hold of the idea, you don't have to like me for me to work with you. I don't know why that was a mantra at the time. Well, that took me off the wrong path for some time, I can tell you. Because actually it really does help if people, you know, like each other. The microclimate or culture is quite important. You know, yes, organisations have a culture, of course they do. But within a team, within a department, within a function, you can create something of your own little, this is how we do things here. And organisations do. They never have a uniform culture. The manager or the leader we've talked about. I want to pick up on the last two particularly, which is positivity and strengths, which we covered a little bit last time. So positivity, absolutely, as we were saying earlier, when people feel good, they feel more sociable, they're more citizenship behaviour, they're more interested in helping others, and so on and so forth. So this is good for team. So hence that getting into that cycle of celebrating, feeling good, that motivates us for the next bit, and then we achieve something, and that's a really nice cycle to get into. And people have also mentioned in different ways this idea of playing to the team's strengths. So are we beholden by the roles that we're put in, or do we start to flex within our unit, our team, so that the person best suited to doing whatever task it is able to do that task, able to volunteer to do it? And so what we're going to do now is just move on to a little bit thinking about for yourselves, with your strengths and your teams. I know you're not, this would be your individual team rather than the teams being in the room. How we might think about working with strengths to help with team performance. So on the I've got yellow, you can't see it. On the left hand, these are some of the kind of ideas about how you can use strengths in teams. So I want to start actually with the fourth one, which I'll rearrange after this because I just realised it's the logical place to start, which is allocating roles in the very first place by strengths. So if you know what your people's strengths are, then you would give them the parts of the things that need to be done that play to that. Developing role fluidity is somebody mentioned this over here, exactly what you were talking about, that people become much less sort of role bound and just do what needs to be done or help each other out. So the role boundaries become very fluid. Shaping roles around strengths really refers to when you've got a role but you bend it to your own shape. So it might be, you know, there's something about needing, part of your job is about communication. Now someone who's got a real strength in face-to-face enthusiasm and motivation and charisma type stuff might love to go around and talk to people to do this communication. Someone whose strength is much more about organising information in a way that makes it easily digestible and so on and so forth might act that part of the role by preparing things very carefully and sending them and then saying, any questions, contact me. Pros and cons to both, I'm sure you can imagine. But that's what people do, is they start to shape the delivery of the role around their own strengths. Complementary pairings, key, clearly. If we can find people whose strengths match each other. The creatives ones is great. You know, a creative who's got a real detail, completer, finisher type person, someone who loves to put it all into order at the end, they could be a great team. So it's sort of finding out whose strengths complement mine, rather than feeling I have to do it all myself. And one of the really key ones is sharing out the things that don't play to anyone's strengths. The jobs that have to be done in the team that make everybody's heart sink, and everybody sort of puts them off till Friday afternoon, you know, a kind of thing. Share them out, do them in small bursts, and do something that really gets your mojo going immediately afterwards, is the way to do it, basically, rather than dumping it all on someone, because your job says you should be doing this. So, what I thought you might do is, we'll put you into some groups. I'm going to give you some strengths cards. Just pick 2 or 3 that you would say, these are my core strengths. You know, it's rough and ready, clearly. A little bit about how you do or don't get to use them at work. And then the kind of key thing is, if your team allocated tasks by strengths rather than by role, what difference might that make to you? How much more time might you spend using your strengths? How might that affect your motivation? So we're just kind of playing around with the idea of, if we knew what our strengths were and we were able to sort of shape our role around them a bit more, what might that mean for us? Is that okay? Have a little think about that. Okay, do you want to just, because you're in pairs, sort of pair up with another pair so you're in a 4? Because that's an easy way to do it. Okay, let's come back together. As I say, if you could just put the cards in the packs, that'd be very helpful. Just before we move on to thinking about performance for individuals, anything anybody wanted to sort of share or comment on from the exercise, particularly? Yep.
That sometimes that skills that or strengths that can be seen can be overplayed in terms of you are then forced into a role that perhaps you don't wish to have.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't know if you were at our session, the last session? Yes, so you remember about the difference between skills and strengths. And we can be very skillful, for the benefit of those of other people, very skillful at something which isn't actually play to our strengths. And if we become very well known for that skill, we keep being asked to repeat it, but actually it's not life enhancing. One of the definitions of using your strengths is it feels very life enhancing. It's soul, you know, enlivening, as opposed to that, you know, losing the will to live sort of feeling, which usually means we're not playing to our strengths. So point well made. And also strength in overdrive. I don't know if any of you looked on the other side of the cards, but it sometimes talks about what happens when the strength goes into overdrive. And Alex Linley talks about the golden mean, which is the right strength in the right context to the right amount. So one of the things about learning to use our strengths is absolutely knowing when they work and when they don't. I remember a long time ago I was in some sort of, I was some colleagues working on some sort of appraisal training we were doing of some description. We had to evaluate what these people were doing, and we were involved in a discussion, and the young man in the discussion, excuse me folks, when he was talking he was like this, you know, getting his point across. And a lot of the other appraisers' comments were, you know, aggressive, domineering, dominating, whereas, and I don't claim any special thing for this, but what I saw was a real enthusiasm to communicate, overplayed. You know, and what he needed was that what we talk about as the dial, the turning the strength up and down dial. So had he been trying to communicate to a room like this, that level of energy might have been appropriate. With 3 other people around the table, it was absolutely overwhelming for the other people. So he needed to learn how to control that enthusiasm for communication and adjust it for different contexts. And that's what we mean about, you know, really getting skillful with your strengths. So point very well made. Thank you.
What we were trying to say, Clare, was actually more about the, say, somebody who's managing somebody, if they identify strength in that person, they can overemphasize it in terms of what they allocate them to do.
Mm-hmm.
So you could end up, for example, if somebody shows that they're very good at delivering on time, you could make it very difficult, you could keep giving them that goal, and then you could burn them out.
Yes. Yeah, there needs... Absolutely, yeah. There needs to be something about negotiation and, yes, taking other things into account. This is not the only criteria. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Yes?
I'm interested in that point and the importance of feedback, both in terms of how you give feedback to other people, but also the benefit of asking for feedback for yourself. So I'm just sort of talking to somebody who's regularly found themselves in that position halfway across the table.
I recognise it too.
Right back.
Yeah.
But if you one thing I learned not that long ago, which I find quite helpful, is asking people to give you specific. If you've got any kind of awareness of things that you might not be happy about the way you do them, asking people for specific feedback. So that means going into a meeting and asking someone, please watch me during and give me feedback on my body language, for example.
Fantastic. Yeah.
It's helpful, actually.
Absolutely, it is, and videos can help as well, and so can code, and so. And so can code words, because when we're in the grip of our strength and our passion, we can lose sight of. And somebody having a word that says, you know, basically alerts you to the fact that take 3 deep breaths and step backwards because you're getting so overpassionate that people are backing off kind of thing, is very useful. So absolutely, these are all great sort of techniques of making sure that our strength adds to the benefit for us and everybody else, rather than becoming a problem for any of us, you know, sort of being overplayed and derailing what we're trying to do. Excellent. Okay, thank you for that. That leads us kind of into individuals. So I'm going to move on to individuals. What helps us flourish as individuals? This is from Seligman's research. He's been very interested. The word flourish, we've heard a couple of times, it kind of, people use it to describe the difference between 0 and +5. So most of our time we're focused on 0 and -5. How do we get people who are mentally ill to be functioning okay? How do we make things that are bad okay? How do we help people become fit enough? What we haven't spent so much time doing is working out, well, these people who are exceptionally vital and have exceptional well-being and are really resilient, you know, have really resilient mental health, what's different about them? Well, how do we get from 0 to +5? And the flourishing, the idea is we can be ill, we can be okay, and we can be flourishing. And when we're in a flourishing state, we're kind of at our best. We're in a sort of +5 state. And these seem to be some of the things that contribute towards people being at their best and feeling their life is well lived, which is kind of quite important and something that the positive psychology movement's very interested in. So positive emotions, yeah, our fair share of feeling good, managing to hit the magic ratio in our lives, as it were. Engagement or flow, you know, having things that we really get engaged in. Flow is that sort of sense of absorption when time disappears, you know, in the dark room if you're a photographer, over the chessboard if you're a chess player, on a mountain if you're a mountaineer, but also in work as well, where we just go, oh my goodness, there's 2 hours gone by, you know, I was just so absorbed in what I was doing, I lost all sense of time. That's very flourishing for us. Meaning, people seek meaning in life. Now, obviously, there are some people find that in particular religions or whatever, but we all look for something about, we don't want to feel we're wasting our whole life away. Something meaningful is going on. So helping people find meaning at work, whatever you do, how does it somehow create something good? It is quite important for helping people feel at their best, that what they're doing is meaningful. Positive relationships has come up a number of times. I'm sure you've heard by now, it's out in the sort of general domain that this is one of the features that distinguish some of the sort of most positive people who seem to feel best satisfied with their lives, is that they have a lot of social relationships. As someone who's not always been very good at this, I am now working like mad as I get older to make sure I've got lots of positive relationships, especially with some people who are a bit younger than me, because I can see that becomes a problem as you hit your 80s. You need some 50-year-old friends, so I'm working now on the 20-year-olds to be my friends when I'm 80. But the research just comes through time and time again. Good relationships, lots of relationships is really good for us. And then accomplishment. This is the one he added more recently when he had feedback from people working with his model, that actually getting good at something, feeling we are accomplished is something that really feeds into our sense of well-being. So that was because we talked about flourishing as organisations, so I thought it might be interesting to think about flourishing as individuals. So all of this, of course, relates to performance. There was a couple of comments I came across while I was sort of thinking about this session that I thought were quite interesting. We live our lives in webs of interdependence, and yet we keep telling ourselves the story that we're independent. Is a point well made. A lot of what we've talked about today is how important context is for how people are and how possible it is to work well, from the very basics of have I got the tool for the job, to the much more global thing of what kind of feedback am I getting that lets me know whether I'm doing well or not. And yet, quite often when we get into the appraisal situation, it's sort of seen as it's all about that person and their accountability. They're accountable for everything that happened. And if they start talking about context or circumstance, it can sometimes be read as excuse. Don't give me your excuses, why didn't it occur? So we somehow have these two things going on. We see people as being full of agency and able to make things happen, and yet we also know in some other part of our brain that actually there's a whole big context we're trying to do things in that we can't always control. So I thought that was kind of interesting, thinking about how we assess performance. And then this is the strength idea, that real excellence is a function of uniqueness. The better we understand what is particular about us and our particular combination, or the other people around us, the better able we are to get the best out of what's there. So there's something about building on our own unique combination of strengths and understanding, of course, where I don't know what language we want to use, but sometimes we refer to our blind spot, if that's acceptable, or our weaknesses, or the canyons as opposed to our peaks of performance. We need to know about them, of course we do, but there's something about understanding that and being able to work with it in what makes us uniquely excellent. And I'm sure you know about the sort of 10,000 hours of practice if you want to do something that's, really, 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 really good. You need lots and lots of practice. Sorry, was that just floor creaking or somebody? So I wanted to think about some of the appreciative approaches to performance development. We spent most of the session on organisations and teams because I know you're going to get a lot of extra work around sort of working with individuals in preparation for the performance reviews that are coming up. And there will be an opportunity in a moment to do something that's more individually based. But I just wanted to bring some of these in. So feed-forward interviews are really about, again, using that episodic memory to discover what your person thinks of as being their best moments and their peak. Before you start appraising them, what's their sense of when they're doing really well? So you'll have a chance to do one of those in a moment. Reflected best self and enthusiasm stories. Reflected best self is a completely alternative way to doing appraisal performance improvement type work, where, and again we might get a chance to talk about this more in another context, but basically you, as the person who wants to find out about their performance, I would invite a number of people to give me a number of accounts of when I'm at my best, when they've seen me at my best, from their perspective, when am I really adding value, really performing well, being a good member of the organisation, whatever questions I choose to ask. So I will end up with sort of 30 stories about my reflections of me at my best, and then my job is to analyse those and pick out what the themes are, to understand how I look to others when I'm at my best, and then to write that kind of profile. And the idea basically is that we want to live up to the expectations of others, we learn something about ourselves, and then we start to project that best persona into the world more. So corrective feedback doesn't come into this particular process. It's all about helping people understand what other people value about them and see as their best assets, and then sort of helping that become part of their own self-image so they can use it and live up to it and work to it. So that's a very different way of thinking about it. Enthusiasm stories are kind of similar, where but it's very much about the appraiser and the appraisee. So part of the conversation, either in the appraisal process or beforehand, is that the appraiser thinks about when they have seen this person at their best that they're about to appraise, when they felt enthusiastic about them. There may be many things that need addressing, but let's start with, where can I find something good to say, generate some interest, be enthusiastic about you, and let's look at what that's telling us about when you're at your best and what success means to me and how it matches with what you think success is and so on. And again, in a minute, you'll have a chance to either ask someone to give you a feed-forward interview, very brief one, I'm afraid, or to think about what might be an enthusiasm story for someone you're going to be performance reviewing shortly. We've obviously talked about developing strengths and encouraging the use of the magic ratio. Win-win goals is basically the idea that when we're thinking in performance situations about targets and aspirations and goals and so on, the more they can be aligned between being a real plus for the person, they'll be able to use their strength more, or they'll develop some new learning or whatever it is, and it's good for the organisation. This is something the organisation needs to achieve. The kind of better that works for everyone. So it kind of sounds obvious, but it's sort of worth spelling out that if we can get the two aligned, there's a benefit for me and there's benefit for the organisation. That makes it more likely the goal will be attractive, motivating, and accepted. Diamond feedback. I promise I'd just mention this. We know that people who can find giving positive feedback quite difficult. We're not, most of us, trained to do it. Some of us are. Some of us grow up in the sorts of families where this is practiced, but not all of us. And so we kind of have to learn a bit more about how to do it. The sort of general feedback, sometimes when people first start trying to do this, they go around spraying compliments over whoever comes across their path. Good, good, well done, fine, fine, lovely, lovely sort of stuff, which is kind of nice, but doesn't really tell anybody anything very much and isn't always accepted. What people have found is much more useful when you're working with leaders and managers and encouraging them to start developing their appreciative eye, to start seeing when their people are doing something good as well as when things are wrong, is to get data and feedback. So it kind of goes, I just wanted to say, I heard you on that phone call. I could tell that the person at the other end was quite distressed. I really liked the way you let them tell you what was wrong for 5 minutes, repeated back what they'd said, and then moved on to say, however, I think if we look a little harder, we'll find, or whatever it was. I really like the way you did that, well done. So there's data, and then there's appreciation. So it's diamond feedback. There's something solid in there. And then it's for the person. They can either recognise it or not. It's either actually, yes, you're right, I'm quite good at that sort of thing. Slowly that begins to build up, enough people tell me that. Or it can be, often if it's a strength, I just thought everybody did that. Oh no, let me tell you. My youngest son is doing some work at some sort of, out of school unit for teenagers. He's just there on this voluntary thing they have to do. He came home the other day and said they'd had affirmations at the end of the day, the staff and the helpers, and this was about finding something positive to say about the person. And his feedback had been that he was very good at not rising to the bait from these kids, which I recognise actually. He's quite, we were quite an emotional family, and he's the one who doesn't rise to the bait and stays quite cool and calm. And I thought that was quite interesting. And he recognised, he said, yeah, I can see what they mean. So he's just beginning to get that sense of this might be something that I do that's different to other people, that's valued by other people. And if we did more of this, I think it would really help all of us understand what we bring and what we offer that might be a bit different to other people. So that was a nice bit of diamond feedback for him. It was appreciated there. Okay, so we're moving on to choice time. Choice time.
Sorry.
Yes.
Could you quickly just go over what feed-forward interviews are again?
Yes, we're about to, you're about to get a chance to do them. Yeah. I'm going to come back to that afterwards because I want to have us a chance to do this. So we've got 3 possibilities. People who are interested to pick up that conversation about OUP as an organisation and as a flourishing organisation, there's some other cards in the pack that might be helpful, like the Abundance Bridge and Flourishing. In fact, all of them might be helpful because they're all about positive culture, plus the ones you had before. So you could continue that conversation just using the cards as a stimulus if you wanted to. So that's option one. Option two is thinking again about strengths and teams, and within this option you have choice. If you wanted to just carry on the conversation you had before, you could. But I've also got a kind of exercise to do with, and it's a bit corny, but you know, got to find something, to do with the challenge of getting Santa out every year. So the team of Santa's team and all the jobs they have to do, and therefore you would think about the strengths you have, all these jobs that have to be done, and how you might allocate them if you were Santa's sort of management team. Okay, so that's kind of a bit of fun. I think you did quite well this year, I hear. And then the last one is if you want to think about, have a practice of either a feed-forward interview or an enthusiasm story, which is more kind of an individual one-to-one basis. Now, if any one person wants to talk about OUP, then they may have to be flexible. But let's make a start. So if we say, if you all get up, just so we know what we've got. This table will be the OUP discussion table. And we make that one about teams and strengths, and individual sort of this end of the room, and we'll just sort of see how it divides up what people are interested in pursuing for the next 20 minutes. And I've got some handouts for the individual one. We need to draw to a close, as people have places to be, trains and planes to catch, I'm sure. Let's just find out whether Christmas is going to happen next year. What do we think? Have we got a team that can deliver? Yeah? And your colleagues here? Absolutely. Brilliant. Excellent. Anything you'd like to share with us about your discussions around OUP flourishing potential?
One of the conclusions that came to is that it doesn't rely on the top-down thing. Actually, it can be, if everybody in this room goes back and starts behaving in a particular way, that's how you change cultures.
Absolutely, the lighting fires approach, as it were. Okay, and the individuals, is there anything you would like to share from your, I know it's slightly rushed for yourselves, these interviews take longer, this is just a 5-finger exercise, but anything that came up for you you'd like to share?
It's powerful to I can imagine it's going to be powerful in one of the situations that we just practiced. Being able to feedback a solid example of great performance and build on it as part of the interview, the appraisal process.
Excellent.
So I can see it as being a really good start to that.
Yeah, good. Thank you very much. Excellent. Anything else anyone wanted to add?
I think it feels kind of awkward at first, and but once you get into the flow, I think, and the practice of it, it would be quite a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely right. And usually when we're doing things we haven't done before compared to what we know how to do well. So I think sometimes saying, I'm going to try something different, you know, bear with me, it might sound a bit funny. There's no harm in saying that if you've got that sort of relationship with somebody. I'm going to, you know, I'm being brave here. Come with me.
Can I give an example of actually being on the receiving end of this approach? I'm doing a coaching qualification at the moment. At the end of the practical study time, where I spent 12 days over a certain amount of time with a fantastic group of people, the 14ers, and we can think about it now. Because the last session was affirming each other, giving feedback about how they experienced you. And we were more worried about that than passing the practical exam in the morning. And honestly, there were people in tears trying to give this stuff because they were so emotionally wrought about the whole idea of giving positive feedback. And it was one of the best experiences of my year last year. It was fantastic. I've got bits of paper and I still go back to them and glow. And it was really interesting just getting someone's 14 to 13 other people's perspectives on me.
Yeah.
And you begin to actually listen and go, okay, there's nothing to say on the right side.
Absolutely. And that's a lovely note to end on, because if nothing else, what we're realising is the more we own our strengths, the better able we are actually to own the things we're not very good at either, and not try and bluff our way through those, but say, this is what I can do, come to me for this, I'm good at this, and I love doing it. That, on the other hand, let's see if we can have a negotiation. You know, and absolutely, the two go very much together, and it is through practice, being a firm, that people start to say, actually, yeah, this is me, this does fit. You know, I can own this. Well, thank you very much for your time and attention this morning. Further resources, there's a book called Positive Psychology Coaching, and there's a book called Appreciative Coaching, both of which have interesting things in them if you want to follow those up. If you're more of a Google search person, strengths-based appraisal, strengths-based performance is probably the sort of search term you're looking for. On your way out, the 4 handouts at the back there, they're the 2 interviews that the guides that the people here were using, the Santa exercise in case you want to use it in any other setting, and just a little bit of data about some of the research support for strengths-based approaches to performance enhancement. So anyway, have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.